Late at night in Loveland, Ohio, a thin layer of mist clings to the roadsides, and the distant river glimmers coldly under the pale moonlight. Locals say that police officers dread patrolling alone on nights like this, because if you get too close to the riverbank beneath the Loveland Bridge, you might just see them, mysterious beings that look eerily similar to aliens. They often crouch near the water's edge, their slick skin reflecting the dim light, and their eyes glowing an unnatural orange-red, as if waiting for something or someone. People here call them the Loveland Frogmen. The name might sound like a joke from some urban legend, but in the history of American cryptids, the Frogmen are backed by actual records. Unlike the Chupacabra, the Dogman, or the Mothman, the Loveland Frogman wasn't born from ancient folklore. It emerged straight from a series of real police reports. It isn't as distant as mythical creatures, nor as traceable as small-town ghost tales. What makes it truly unsettling is that every one of the earliest witnesses were rational people, with no reason or desire to lie. It all began on a rainy night in May 1955. Along the Little Miami River near Loveland, Ohio, a 26-year-old traveling salesman named Robert H. Harrison was driving over a small country bridge. The narrow road twisted through tall weeds and had no streetlights. Only his headlights cut a sharp white line through the darkness. Harrison's mind was occupied with a business deal scheduled for the next morning. Though tired, he forced himself to stay alert. As his car reached the Loveland Bridge, a thin mist was rising from the rain-soaked river, making the whole bridge look hazy and unfamiliar. Straining to see the road ahead, Harrison suddenly caught sight of a flicker of movement along the shoulder. A small, shadowy figure, low to the ground but clearly moving. His heart clenched. Instinctively, he hit the brakes. The headlights flared, flooding the scene in bright white light. And in that moment, Harrison nearly forgot to breathe. Standing by the river, not far from his car, were three strange creatures. They stood no taller than 3 feet, their bodies thin yet upright in a disturbingly human-like posture. Their gray-green skin shimmered with a wet, slippery sheen under the light, its surface covered in fine reptilian textures, like the hide of an amphibian. Their long arms hung by their sides, webbed fingers glistening faintly. These beings didn't resemble any known animal. They were like something caught between species, part amphibian, part human, and the sight of them filled Harrison with a chill he would never forget. The sight before him left Harrison frozen in the driver's seat, his palms sweating so much that they soaked through the steering wheel. The three unknown creatures by the river seemed to have noticed the headlights too, but they didn't run. They just stood there, motionless, watching him in a heavy, unsettling silence that felt almost intelligent. That's when Harrison finally saw their eyes clearly. Large, round orbs glowing with a deep orange hue, like the color of metal heated to an unbearable temperature. The longer he stared, the more unnatural they seemed. For about 10 seconds, man and creatures locked eyes in a tense, eerie standoff. Then one of the beings slowly raised its arm and lifted something into the air. Whatever it was, it glinted for an instant under the headlights. Part metallic, part unknown artifact. No sound followed, no light beam, no movement, just a single fleeting flash, almost like a signal. It seemed to communicate something to the other two, because a moment later, all three turned in unison and leapt into the river below the bridge. Their movement was swift, far too smooth for a human, yet not quite like any animal either. Within seconds, the splashing water settled, leaving only faint ripples fading on the surface. The mist began to gather again, curling over the river until it looked as if nothing had ever happened. Harrison sat there in a daze, his heartbeat pounding so hard it drowned out the sound of the engine. He tried to calm himself, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. The darkness ahead seemed to open up like a gaping mouth, swallowing every trace of what he had just seen. Only the damp, cold air of the rainy night reminded him. It was real. All of it was real. Panicked, Harrison slammed the accelerator. The tires screeched, and the car sped off into the night. When he finally reached town, he stumbled into the police station, desperately trying to explain the bizarre scene he had witnessed. The officers inside exchanged doubtful glances. In that era, such a story sounded far too absurd. One officer even wrote in the report, "Likely mistook an animal near the river for an unidentified creature." Another chuckled quietly, handed Harrison a cup of coffee, and suggested he was just overtired, maybe hallucinating. Yet despite the skepticism, the incident was officially recorded, becoming the earliest documented sighting of the Loveland Frogmen. In 1955, Harrison's experience was dismissed as nothing more than drunken nonsense. But 17 years later, at the very same location, the same kind of creature would appear again. And this time, the witness wasn't a salesman, it was a police officer. The 1972 encounter would turn the so-called Frogman joke into a mystery that demanded to be taken seriously. In the early hours of March 3, 1972, Officer Ray Shockey was driving his patrol car slowly along the old highway that ran beside the Little Miami River. It was his usual nightly route, one he knew like the back of his hand. The narrow bridge, the flickering streetlights, the long shadows cast by telephone poles. All of it had been part of his nightly routine for years. As Shockey's car rolled over the bridge, the headlights swept across the darkness beneath it, when suddenly a shadow shot out from below and stopped right in the middle of the road. Instinctively, Shockey slammed the brakes. In that frozen moment of light, he finally saw what it was. It was something that defied classification. Its skin was grayish-green, slick and wet, with a faint sheen under the lights. Its body shape resembled a human's, though slightly hunched, with arms that hung too long and webbed fingers that caught the light when they moved. It stood there upright, its chest rising and falling rhythmically, as if it were breathing through lungs. Shockey also noticed the air had changed. It was filled with a damp, fishy stench, like mud being stirred up from the bottom of the river. Then in the span of just a few seconds, the creature moved. It crouched slightly, its leg muscles tightening, and with a sudden leap, it disappeared into the darkness beneath the embankment. A split second later, there was a splash from the river below. Water rippled violently, spreading outward into the fog until the night fell silent again. The only sound that remained was the whisper of the wind brushing through the treetops. For a long moment, Shockey just sat there, forcing himself to breathe, trying to stay calm. He remained in the car for about a minute before finally restarting the engine and speeding away down the road. He knew no one would believe what he'd just seen, so he didn't bother telling his colleagues much. His official report contained only a few brief lines. Cited an unidentified humanoid creature. Notable amphibian characteristics observed, but once word got out, the teasing began. Some officers joked that he'd only seen a stray dog reflecting light in the dark. Yet just a few days later, something even stranger happened. 4 days later, in the early hours of March the 7th, the mist once again blanketed the same stretch of road. Another officer, Mark Matthews, was on patrol there. He had heard Shockey's story but didn't believe a word of it. That night he decided to check it out for himself, partly out of curiosity, partly because he wanted to mock Shockey later. As Matthews slowed down near the bridge, the headlights swept across the fog. And that's when he saw it. A blurry shape crouched on the ground, moving slowly, as if rummaging for something. From the outline, it was slightly bigger than a dog, but its posture and proportions were disturbingly human-like. Thinking it might be an injured animal, Matthews stepped out of his car and began to approach. When he was about 10 meters away, the figure suddenly lifted its head. What he saw shattered his understanding of reality. It had an oval-shaped head, almost alien in form, its entire body covered in slick, gray-green skin. Two enormous eyes glowed faintly orange in the beam of his flashlight. Matthew's breathing quickened in panic. He fumbled for his gun, raising it shakily. But before he could even aim, the creature sprang up with astonishing force and leapt into the river, vanishing instantly beneath the water. Moments later, the mist closed in again, sealing the river in silence, as if nothing had ever happened. The two police sightings completely blew the Loveland Frogmen story wide open. Local media across Ohio jumped on the reports, and even TV stations sent crews to camp out along the banks of the Little Miami River, hoping to catch the creature on film. While the police never publicly admitted that the frogmen existed, they quietly formed an informal investigation team to collect every related sighting. By the end of 1972, the team had received 21 eyewitness reports from farmers, teachers, students, and even a local pastor. What stood out was that every witness described the frogmen in remarkably similar detail, with no major contradictions. That consistency made the case even harder to dismiss. Of course, skeptics argued the whole thing was fabricated by the police just to grab attention. But both Shockey and Matthews were respected veteran officers, known for their integrity. They had no reason to risk their careers over a hoax. Even more curious, both sightings occurred less than 3 miles apart, along the same stretch of the Little Miami River. That raised an unsettling question. Could something actually be living beneath the river? Could there really be a hidden frog-like humanoid tribe lurking below? The Shawnee, the Native American tribe originally from the Loveland area, have their own explanation. In their ancient legends, the Little Miami River was known as the River of Life, and deep beneath its waters lived a river deity called Mashiach. According to Shawnee elders, Mashiach's appearance was half man, half frog, covered in green scales, and he carried a glowing staff of light that illuminated the river. That description is almost identical to what the police officers claim to have seen, especially the detail about one creature holding a metallic, glowing object. In Shawnee lore, Mashiach was said to protect the river's creatures and punish those who polluted its waters. When someone encountered him, it was considered a divine omen, either a sign of blessing or a warning that the river's purity was in danger. And strangely enough, that part of the legend seems to line up with history. Loveland has its share of industrial scars. In the mid-20th century, Ohio was one of America's major industrial hubs, and several chemical and nuclear plants operated around Loveland. Between 1950 and 1959, local newspapers repeatedly exposed factories dumping toxic waste into the Little Miami River. That decade, coincidentally or not, was also the peak period of frogman sightings. Some people began to wonder, could industrial wastewater or nuclear radiation have caused the frogs in the river to mutate into half-human, half-frog creatures? This theory reached its peak after the 1972 police sightings, when residents even organized protests demanding that local chemical plants be shut down. But factory owners quickly fired back, claiming their wastewater met federal safety standards and couldn't possibly cause biological mutations. Any so-called deformed frogs, they said, were nothing more than natural genetic anomalies, unrelated to industrial pollution. As public pressure mounted, the government dispatched a biologist named Mike Harper to test the water quality and study the local wildlife in the Little Miami River. After collecting samples and conducting detailed analyses, Harper discovered that the frogs in the river did show slight genetic mutations. Their skin was darker and their bodies were slightly larger than average, but nowhere near the level required to evolve into a humanoid form. In his final report, Harper wrote, "From a biological standpoint, it is impossible for frogs to evolve into half-human creatures. However, that doesn't mean what people saw wasn't real. It could be a species we haven't yet identified, or something beyond our current understanding." After that, the incident slowly faded from public attention. Today, the city of Loveland has fully embraced the frogman as part of its identity. Every May, locals celebrate the Loveland Frogmen Festival. People dress in green, wear frog masks, and parade along the Little Miami River. They eat frog-shaped cakes, sip frog-themed drinks, and some businesses even offer frogman adventure tours. Visitors retrace the patrol routes of the police officers who once claimed to see the creature, then camp by the riverside at night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary frogman themselves. Of course, skeptics insist the entire story was an elaborate hoax, that from Harrison's 1955 sighting to the 1972 police encounters, it was all carefully fabricated to attract tourists and boost the local economy. But regardless of what the truth may be, the legend has already become a living part of Loveland's culture, a shared memory among its residents. As one exhibit plaque in the local museum reads, "Whether the frogman exists or not isn't what matters. What matters is that it made us remember the Little Miami River, remember the story of the city, and remember humanity's eternal curiosity and awe toward the unknown." Maybe one day science will uncover the truth behind the Loveland Frogman. Maybe it will turn out to be a new species. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Or maybe just a myth. But until that day comes, this half-human, half-frog creature will remain hidden in the dark nights of Loveland, beneath the rippling waters of the Little Miami River, and deep within the hearts of those who still dare to believe. Because sometimes the legend itself moves us far more than the truth ever could.